The Galactic Council had been clear in their assessment. Humans were too fragile for frontline combat. Their bones broke too easily, their skin tore like paper, and their bodies lacked the natural armor that evolution had granted to nearly every other sentient species in the known galaxy. When Earth petitioned for inclusion in the Unified Defense Force, the Council's response had been diplomatic but firm. Humans would serve in support roles only. Captain Rhea had heard those words repeated so many times they'd become background noise. Medical support.
Engineering Corps, communications, never combat?
Never where it mattered. But war had a way of ignoring bureaucratic restrictions. The siege of Kronos 7 had stretched into its third month when everything went catastrophically wrong. The defensive line buckled under a coordinated swarm assault, and suddenly every soldier, regardless of species or designation, found themselves fighting for survival. Rhea's medical transport had been in the rear when the plasma artillery began raining down, turning the landscape into a hellscape of molten rock and superheated air. Torin, the Predator commander overseeing the western flank, had watched the strike through his tactical display. His species, the Kethrin, stood 9 feet tall with natural dermal plating that could deflect small arms fire. They were built for war, engineered by a billion years of evolution on a death world where everything wanted to kill everything else. When he saw the human transport take a direct hit, he'd marked it as a total loss without a second thought. Fragile things died quickly in war. That was simply the way of the universe. The battle raged for another 6 hours. The swarm pushed hard, testing every weakness in their line, probing for the breakthrough that would let them pour through and overwhelm the defense. Torin commanded his troops with the cold efficiency his people were known for, rotating units, calling in airstrikes, making the hard calculations that determined who lived and who died. When the dust finally settled and the swarm withdrew to regroup, Torin conducted his damage assessment. 43 casualties, 12 vehicles destroyed, 1 medical transport, human crude, obliterated in the opening salvo. He logged it mechanically, already moving on to the next crisis. Then his communications officer made a sound Torin had never heard before, something between confusion and disbelief. "Commander," the officer said, manipulating the holographic display. "I'm picking up a distress beacon. Human signature, coming from Crater 7. Crater 7 was where the medical transport had died." Toran's eyes narrowed behind his battle helm. "Equipment malfunction. The beacon must have survived the blast. Sir, it's a personal beacon, not vehicle-based." Torin felt something cold settle in his chest, an emotion his people rarely experienced. Uncertainty. He pulled up the drone feed, directing it toward the coordinates. The crater was massive, at least 50 meters across and 10 deep, the edges still glowing with residual heat. Nothing could have survived in there. Nothing. The drone descended through the smoke and ash, its sensors cutting through the haze. At first, Torin saw only debris, twisted metal, molten composites, the scattered remains of medical equipment. Then the camera focused on the crater's center, and he saw something that made his battle-hardened mind stutter. A figure was moving. Captain Rhea pulled herself out of the wreckage with movements that were mechanical, driven by sheer will rather than conscious thought. Her left arm hung at an unnatural angle, clearly broken. Her uniform was scorched and torn, revealing burns across her shoulder and ribs. Blood, that peculiar red human blood, covered half her face from a gash across her scalp. She should have been dead. By every metric of survivability that Torin understood, she should have been vaporized in the initial blast. But she was standing. Torin watched through the drone feed as Rhea oriented herself, her working hand touching the communicator at her collar. Her voice came through his command channel, hoarse and threaded with pain but absolutely steady. "Captain Rhea to command. Medical transport Oscar 7 destroyed. Crew casualties, total except myself. Requesting evac and reinforcements. I have wounded still breathing in the wreckage." Torin's translator chip struggled with the idiom still breathing, but the meaning was clear enough. Somehow, impossibly, there were survivors in that crater, and this broken human was going back for them. "Human captain," Torin transmitted directly, his voice carrying the harmonics of command that made his species such natural leaders. "You are severely wounded. Remain in place. Rescue units are en route." Through the drone's camera, he watched Rhea look up as if she could see him through the sky itself. Even through the blood and ash, her eyes were clear. Determined. Negative, Commander. I have soldiers down here who need immediate medical attention. I didn't survive this just to watch them die waiting for rescue. She turned away from the drone, limping toward a piece of wreckage that had been the transport's medical bay. Torin watched, transfixed, as she began moving debris with her one good arm, hauling aside chunks of metal that should have required mechanical assistance. Over the next 40 minutes, as rescue teams mobilized and raced toward the crater, Torin maintained his drone surveillance. He told himself it was tactical necessity, monitoring the situation, ensuring no swarm forces took advantage of the vulnerability. But truthfully, he couldn't look away. Captain Rhea worked like someone possessed. She'd fashioned a splint for her broken arm using debris and medical tape. She'd packed her own wounds with whatever supplies she could scavenge. And then she'd gone to work on the others, 3 Kethran soldiers who'd been thrown into the crater by the blast, all unconscious, all bleeding from wounds that would have killed lesser species. She moved between them, performing emergency triage with hands that shook from pain and blood loss. She established IVs using her teeth to tear open packages when her injured arm wouldn't cooperate. She applied pressure bandages, administered stims, did everything in her power to keep them alive. When the rescue dropship finally descended into the crater, Torin was on it. He'd told his executive officer he needed to assess the situation personally, but that was a lie. He needed to see this human with his own eyes, needed to understand what he was witnessing. Rhea looked up as the dropship's ramp lowered, relief washing over her features. But she didn't collapse, didn't give in to the injuries that should have killed her hours ago. Instead, she pointed to the 3 Kethran soldiers. "These 3 first," she ordered the medical team. "Stabilize them before—" "Captain," Torin's voice stopped her mid-sentence. He descended the ramp, his massive form towering over her. Up close, he could see the full extent of her injuries. The burns went deeper than he'd thought. The broken arm had compound fractures. She'd lost enough blood that her skin had taken on a grayish pallor. She met his gaze without flinching. This fragile creature who should have been dead 10 times over. "They said your kind was too fragile for frontline duty," Torin said quietly, a statement that somehow became a question. Rhea's lips pulled into something that wasn't quite a smile. "They did, Commander. But fragile and weak aren't the same thing." She swayed slightly and Torin's hand shot out to steady her, gently, afraid his strength might shatter her bones. "Humans break, sir. We break all the time. We just don't stay broken." Her eyes rolled back, consciousness finally abandoning her now that help had arrived. Torin caught her carefully, lifting her as if she weighed nothing, treating her with a reverence usually reserved for holy relics. As his medical team swarmed around the wounded, Torin looked down at the unconscious human in his arms. Captain Rhea had done more in the last 6 hours with broken bones and catastrophic injuries than many warriors accomplished in an entire career. She'd survived the unsurvivable and saved lives while doing it. The Galactic Council had said humans were too fragile for frontline duty. Watching Captain Rhea being loaded onto the medical transport, Torin made a decision. When she recovered, and she would recover, because apparently humans were too stubborn to let death have the final word, he would personally recommend her for the Kethran Star of Valor. More than that, he would return to the Council with evidence they couldn't ignore. Humans might be fragile, but they were far from weak. And perhaps fragility combined with that inexplicable human refusal to quit made them the most dangerous warriors the galaxy had ever seen. After all,